Hey guys, Sierra Bailey here with Accel Commercial Real Estate. The video you're watching ties into our event in June, Accelerate. If you want to learn more about what you see today, scan the QR code on your screen or click the link in the description to get your tickets now before early bird pricing runs out. Enjoy the video.
What would you say the top three things you learned from running Cardone Capital were?
Grant, uh, so the good thing I would say this. So Grant eats, breathes, and sleeps everything he talks about. At the time when I was there, we were buying Class B properties. And right after I left, they started buying, Class A stuff. And they started, really bragging about overpaying for it. That's not really what I'm favorable of, but I am okay with the B class stuff because I think that it's a good safety net just across the board. But, one thing that Grant used to teach us is, don't go for the get rich quick, go for the get rich for sure. And if you buy and you hold long enough, it's going to appreciate over time. And I'd say one of the best things that he probably taught me was if you buy with the right amount of cash flow, the right amount of cash flow will take you through any downturn. And so that's something that I implemented from day one, because I started looking for properties that were, putting off, a 10 to 12% cash on cash right out of the gate. And thankfully we did that because, 2 years later, in some cases, that's when the pandemic hit and, people were hit with some delinquency issues. Some were, worse hit than others. We never did a forbearance on our notes. We kept everybody employed and we kept all of our bills paid. And we even had some distributions, quite a few distributions go out, but we held back a little bit more cash just because, we didn't know what we didn't know. But if I would not have adopted the philosophy of, buying with the right cash flow in place, we would have probably been forced to go into forbearance. And that's quite honestly what scares me a little bit about what I see some syndicators in the market doing today is they're just so eager to buy something that I'm afraid that they're overpaying for a lot of stuff. And if something were to happen and another pandemic come around, and if they're overpaying for it, like you see the stuff that I mentioned in Grant is bragging about overpaying for, I mean, gosh, if you're living with small margin and there's a hiccup in operations because of collections issues, it could be painful.
Hey, Benjamin, the first time I ever heard you speak, you talked about something I had never heard about before, but I'm so new. And that was, even after you paid some of your investors off, they still retain some equity in the deal. Was that you? Or maybe I was thinking of someone else. Was that you?
No, yes. And so, I think I spoke at a local RIA in Hendersonville, and at the time we were buying a 108 unit property on the water in Daytona Beach. Paid a good price for it, and the plan was to acquire that, refinance it after year two, and pretty much give all investors their capital back plus any deferred distributions. And at the refi, they would continue holding their pro rata share of ownership in the property. And we're actually in the process of refinancing that property right now to do just that. However, that doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. It's all on what you disclose to your investors, because I know a lot of people that would buy a property with investors' money. At the refi, they would pay their investors back and really pay them off. And then the sponsor would just continue holding the property, without any investors in the deal. I've seen it go both ways, but I've always left my investors in the deal.
I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's a way, because my philosophy is it's a lot of work and time invested in raising capital from people. And my philosophy is if you take care of your investors, they're always going to be around for more deals. And I will tell you that since I adopted that, I have many investors that just can put anything in front of them and they'll invest because there's an element of trust there. And I think that goes well with, if you take care of them, they'll take care of you. I think the sponsors that pay off their investors and move on, I wouldn't say they're wrong. It's just a different business model. But I would say that you'll find if you really want to build a long lasting business, I think that, being good to the LPs, giving them preferential treatment over yourself is key. Just using the Chattanooga portfolio, for instance, we were paying distributions every single month on that portfolio at 8%. And then the pandemic hit. And just like everybody else, the word on the street was you're about to lose everything you have. So hold on tight. And so I'd say 90 to 95% of the other sponsors in the market, a lot that were much bigger than us, they would just withhold all the cash because they didn't know what to expect. And we did the same thing. But even throughout the 2020 pandemic, we still ended up paying out 6 distributions last year. But that was to my 2 main LP partners. And I have equity in the deal too, on both the LP and the GP side. And I didn't pay myself one dime, although I could have. I did not pay myself one dime over the entire 2020 period because I wanted to make sure my LPs were taken care of. So now fast forward to today, as of the past 4 months, the properties started throwing off consistent distributions once again. And now we're actually making up for the deferred distributions from last year. We've already made up 2 of those. So now we have 4 more to go. So I'll take care of my LPs first before I take care of myself. And I think that philosophy, and it can only benefit you if you can afford to go that route. If they know that you truly are taking care of them, then they'll fight for you. So, but there are still investors that nothing is going to please them. So believe me, if you don't have a bad investor yet, you'll have at least one. And I think you need that one because you need that one to work out some ideas that you didn't know that you needed.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ted.
So do lenders care how you build your track record as an GP or an LP, or you think it matters when you buy your first deal?
Yes, it does. They do want to see, and this is speaking of the agencies, because that's the only debt I've ever done is all agency debt, and I've done a life co debt on a property. Is actually the only recourse loan that I have. Banks may see it a little bit different, so that question may be a little bit answered different with a bank than what I'll say. But I would say, based on my knowledge, it is better to have a small GP percentage at the table because it shows that you are a key principal and a general partner at the table. Ideally, you would have some type of management role because that's only going to reflect better in the eyes of the lender. If they see that you're a passive investor in a property, it doesn't reflect as well, but it reflects better than not having anything. If that makes sense.
Other questions, Drew? Go for it.
Yes,
You look like you have something.
Yeah, so you mentioned when you at buy, you look for 10 to 12% cash on cash. That's obviously before rehab. Is that correct?
In most cases, yes. Now, fast forward to today, it's very hard to come by. But two years ago, you could. I would say this, that in the middle of the pandemic last year, I was brought a 50-unit property in Georgia. We were under contract at a, I want to say it was like 65 a door, but it was a single property. All the units are in one building. During the pandemic, we actually had our rate locked in early on. So the lower the rate went, the better our returns became. But the lower the rate went, the higher the seller's defeasance was. And so it was eating up all of his profits. And so he approached me and said, "Hey, would you consider a loan assumption?" And I said, "Well, I would consider a loan assumption, but I'm going to back into a 75% LTV." He agreed to it. I ended up buying the property for $12,000 a unit less than I had it under contract for. It's an amortizing loan day one. and it throws off 12% cash on cash day one.
How do you typically distribute to investors? Do you use a percentage return, or do you promote after an IRR or equity multiple hurdle?
It's just a straight, we prefer 8%, although that may change to a 7 moving forward. But right now we're paying it off based on an 8. It really depends on the turnaround and the cash flow that's available. Because you may, if you're doing a reposition, because we have been in situations to where we had a 20% vacancy rate because it affects cash flow, but we had to do it in order to get to the other side and really start pushing our business plan forward. So there was a few months that we paid based on the 3% or 4% hurdle, but for the most part, we pay out 8s. It's just easier because all of our waterfalls are based on an 8 pref with either a single tier or a multi-tier waterfall structure. But I prefer keeping it as simple as possible because it's math that anybody can calculate. Because otherwise, if you try to get fancy into multi-tier waterfalls, it becomes a complicated conversation where you have to get an accountant involved in many cases. Because some of this concept is so new to some of the investors that will be coming in that they just don't get it. So, keeping it as simple is the best way of doing it, in my opinion.
So Benjamin, we have about 10 minutes, and
Okay.
we have to wrap it up. Do you have any war stories? What's like the biggest learning experience that you've had that maybe you could share with us so that we could maybe learn from your tuition?
I would say that there's 2. One will be investor based. One will be the ability of pivoting. So we bought 2 properties 2 years ago in Middle Georgia, and one had a higher interest loan on it because there was a mix up with the lender that we had in the place, and basically it was a Freddie Mac loan. Freddie Mac told the lender they weren't going to take the note on, so we ended up getting stuck with a higher interest rate loan because we had to bring in a bridge group just to kind of get it across the closing table, and then we were in the process of taking that out, and the pandemic hit. The challenge with that was we had 1 year interest only, so on a 8% note, which means that when P&I kicked in the middle of a pandemic, it means that there's very little, if any, cash flow at all. In that case, you were just breaking even. So as the pandemic came closer to an end, we started moving forward with the refi. So we just recently refied that back in February, and we actually got a 4% rate on it and 3 years interest only. And we were able to pull out $600,000 cash. But the reason I bring that up is you can't discount building out your resources as early on as possible from a lender standpoint, equity, investor standpoint, lender partners, your vendors, as early on as possible, because it gives us the ability of pivoting. And that property was penciling to a 14% cash on cash when we underwrote it. Obviously, with the little hiccups that came through, we were able to pivot and get out of that. And now the deal is penciling a 16% cash on cash, and we're hitting it because of that refi. So I think that speaks well of, having the right lender partners in position that will allow you to pivot. The other is, if anybody follows me on social media, you'll see I do a lot of posting, and I did a post recently about all investors not being equal, or their money not being equal. So in my opinion, a dollar has a different value for each investor. There are investors that are truly easy to work with, and it's all about communication. It's all about fulfilling your business plan. And everybody knows, or they should know, that a business plan doesn't always go according to plan, but it's important to know that if it does not, what are you doing to course correct and fix it to get us back on track? And communication is very key. But I have one particular investor that kind of, encouraged me in a way to write that post about not all investor capital being equal. And the reason why I say that is because there are some investors that are going to be very, very difficult to work with. I have one investor that's in one of my properties that throughout the pandemic we were paying distributions every single month. When the pandemic hit, we only paid out half, and then now we'll fast forward to today, we're making up for some of those deferred distributions. This investor is convinced I'm stealing his money. He's convinced it has nothing to do with the pandemic. He thinks I'm robbing the investors of $11,000 a month. And it's crazy. I mean, some of the stuff, I will show you the text message this guy sends me. It is insanity. But this has all opened my eyes to understand that not all investors are created equal. You eventually will find that one person that no matter what you do, you're not going to make them happy, even if the deal that they're involved in is performing better than most others. You just have to realize that there are going to be some bad apples. But I think you truly need that. Like, I'm glad that I have this person at the table, even though he's just a nightmare to deal with. I actually do appreciate the fact that he's there, because it's opened my eyes to the reality that you need to vet your investors. Don't just take anybody's money because they're trying to throw it at you, because you never know what what the true motives are. Someone may try to get themselves into your deal just because they want to try to force you to screw up. So they try to, maybe even try to sue you. And nobody wants that. And so I think you need to vet, just like an investor is going to vet you. They're going to vet the deal, and they should, but also think as a sponsor, you also need to vet that investor to see if they are going to be the right fit, both personality wise, because it's one thing to send out reports consistently and have the same communication with everybody, and you'll know the investor when they pop up, because you'll send them a report or a message. They'll follow up with another question. They'll follow up with 60 more questions behind. And a lot of these are questions that have nothing to do. There's this one investor, he goes into my politics. Like, he starts sending me screenshots of politics that I post on my personal social media page. And I keep my business and politics separate. And regardless of what somebody believes politically or spiritually, whatever, I can respect anybody's beliefs. But he's constantly throwing up political things in my face. And it's like, what's the point of this? But once again, I appreciate the fact that it has happened, because it opened my eyes to knowing that moving forward, the right investors have to be in the deal. Because you don't have the time or energy to waste babysitting some of this nonsense. Hope that was helpful.
No, that was actually very, very helpful. So
We have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple more questions here.
Yeah.
For someone who's starting out in multifamily, what would be the smallest number of units you would recommend?
It goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's like, if you did, 25, 50, 75, whatever, I would try to acquire that and scale it up as quickly as possible, because it's only going to help keep your expenses down, and expenses as far as like your R&M costs, your operational costs, especially from a management fee perspective. The more scale you have, the less you're going to pay in most cases. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself with 55%, 57, even close to 60% expense ratios if you try to operate a 40 or 50 unit deal without scaling it out. Whereas if you were to scale it out to 100, 150 units is where I would recommend, then you can knock that down to a 47 to even maybe a 50% expense ratio, which I wouldn't recommend going higher than that.
So no experience buying that first 100 units. Where do you start? Where do you get the capital?
Great question. So when I first started, I had to partner up with people, and the power of partnerships. I mean, it's just like picking the right investor. You want to pick the right partner because you're married to someone for the life of that deal, whether that's a 1-year deal, 3-year, or 5-year deal. So this 50 unit deal in Atlanta that I bought with a partner in South Florida. He had the net worth, he had the liquidity, he had the track record that I needed to lean into from both a lender standpoint as well as from an equity raise standpoint. So I really had to lean into him. And that meant that I gave up management control at that point in time. Although I was on the GP side, I was not a manager in the general partnership, but I did what I had to do. And the mistake I see a lot of people make is they're afraid to give up control. They think that they need or they deserve to have, everything in their first deal. And I would highly recommend leaning into someone else's expertise to get a deal done. Number one, it's going to help you get debt. It's going to help you get equity. And it's going to help you get experience. And most importantly, it's going to help you get that track record built, because that's ultimately what you're after.
Thanks for watching this video. If you like what you see, be sure to follow our Generational Wealth Learning series. On select Thursdays, we offer cutting-edge industry information that would normally cost thousands of dollars. And the best part, our education is absolutely free. If you register through our events page, you can join us live, either in person or over Zoom. In the meantime, like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a beat.